Your Authentic Self
is a podcast designed to guide you towards a deeper, more rewarding life by nurturing your emotional, mental, physical and spiritual well-being. We're thrilled to take you on this journey. Welcome to today's episode.
So welcome to today's episode of Your Authentic Self. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that is probably going to be relevant to everybody watching or listening this, and we've called it child, teen, adult. So where to begin with this? It's quite a deep subject, isn't it, Lee? So I'm thinking about kind of explaining a little bit about what this means in terms of ourselves. So all of us are made up of different parts, aren't we? We're all made up of different parts of self. So we might have a child part of us, we've probably got a teenage part of us, got an adult part of us, and there's other parts too, isn't there? But for the sake of this episode, should we just focus on the child, the teen and the adult? Yeah. And we can talk about other parts in other episodes, can't we? So probably most people who are listening to this wouldn't necessarily stop to think about how is my child presenting in this, how's my adult presenting, where's my teenager. So I think it's worth us just kind of explaining a little bit about what happens, about how these parts of us come into being. So to my understanding, do add a little bit if you've got anything that's slightly different to this. So the child part of us of course exists when we're in our childhood years. And then sometimes in childhood we experience trauma. And what we have to recognise is that the trauma for a child might be different to what we consider to be traumatic as an adult. So for example, losing a teddy bear for a child could be absolutely traumatic and devastating, but for an adult we might just think, well, you could just get a new teddy bear, or you've got hundreds of others upstairs. So actually what's traumatic for a child is very different potentially to what we might consider to be traumatic as an adult. Yeah. So when these traumas happen in childhood, the way I explain it is it's almost like time is frozen. And so there's a part of us that gets frozen in time. So we actually, continue to grow older, but we have, a 6, 7, 8-year-old child part of us, for example, that gets frozen in time, but still influences us, still, has those feelings, those thoughts, those worries, those fears that it had back when it was 6. So I think it might be 46, 56, 66, it doesn't matter, does it? There's still that child part frozen in time. Yeah. So
yes,
you concur with that?
Yeah, I'm with you so far.
You're with that, yeah. So then what happens, I think, is we obviously get into our teenage years, and stereotypically teenage years are kind of more of a rebellious time, aren't they? A time when we kind of kick back, we start to find our own authority, we've got more freedom, more independence. And so I think what can often happen is this teenage part of us almost like emerges as like a protector. So the idea of the teenage part is that it protects the younger child part from further hurt, from further trauma, from further humiliation, from shame. And it can do that in all kinds of ways. Perhaps we'll share some of our own examples in a bit, but the teenage part will try and protect the vulnerable child part from re-experiencing anything that's similar to what it's already been through. And then hopefully we manage to develop some kind of connection to our adult self that emerges obviously as we go through those teenage years and become adults. But I think the problem is that even when we do get to adulthood, we're still so heavily influenced by that vulnerable child and by the teen that's doing its best to protect the vulnerable child. So most often when we're trying to go about our adult lives, we're so heavily influenced, but without awareness of this, that our child part and our teenage part can end up creating big problems for us when we get to be adults, can't it? And without awareness of this, I think it's just a nightmare, because it can, impact on relationships in a negative way, impact on work, on raising children, on our place in society, our ability to have friends and relationships. It can be huge, can't it?
It can be, yeah. So I suppose, speak from my own perspective, is just going back, you were saying about the teenage protecting the young child. But I can remember even from a young age of, I went through some childhood adversity and physical abuse. So I can remember at that time getting a sense of, in those moments of feeling anxious, fearful, powerless, and being dominated. But I can remember even being a child and being at school then, and any moment that I would feel that maybe another child was dominating me, or a teacher or something, that's when I'd need to protect myself.
Yeah.
You know, so but then I would disconnect from that
Yeah.
sense of powerless and think I'm not being dominated. So then I would try to be the dominator.
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah.
To not feel anxious.
Yeah.
And powerless. So
Yeah.
even from a young age, I've still that protector was still coming in, which would, as you say. But then if you're still having those adaptive behaviours in adulthood, it's it didn't serve me that well at times.
No, I can imagine. Yeah. Well, it's hard, isn't it, to be an adult kind of behaving in the way that a 6-year-old might, or to be an adult and behaving in the way a 14-year-old might.
Yeah.
It doesn't work so well, does it?
No, it doesn't.
You know.
Not in interpersonal and intimate
No.
relationships.
No.
Well, not in any relationship.
In any
really.
relationships or in any walk of life,
No.
There's not going to be many partners, is there, who tolerates a grown man having a temper tantrum on the living room carpet. It's not going to happen, is it? Or an employer who is going to tolerate somebody storming out of the workplace because they've been upset by something.
That's right. Yeah.
So it doesn't work, does it? We can understand how the toddler might storm out of the room because they're upset, but you're not going to get away with that in the same way when you.
And it even comes in with teenagers, isn't it? Because my teacher was very, very anti-authority. But even getting into adult life and you're getting into work, as you're saying, if you've got a boss or working for someone, you can't be anti-authority every single thing that they want you to do.
Absolutely.
So you can't be arguing at every moment. And putting up barriers all the time.
Absolutely. So you shared a bit about yours there. I mean, my child was incredibly neglected. There was no kind of emotional needs met. No attention, no love, none of those kind of things that children really need. So my young child self was really starved of all that kind of positive attention and love and affirmation and all of those things. Nobody was around to ever play with me as a child. There was no kind of mum playing games with me or any of that kind of stuff. And so as I became a teenager, of course, I was absolutely starving for this kind of positive attention. And so as a teenager, to try and compensate for that, what I did was to develop really strong people-pleasing tendencies. So I actually really worked hard to make sure that everybody was okay, that I looked after everybody to my own cost. It didn't matter to me if I was okay or not. It was more about, is everybody else okay? And what I realised through doing that was I used to get a pat on the back for it, not necessarily from my parents, but it would be other people, like a friend of the family might say, "Oh, isn't he good? Doesn't he look after you well?" My family's incredibly dysfunctional, so it's hard for some people to perhaps get their head around this. But I remember my mother's father thanked me for taking care of my mother, which strikes me now as quite bizarre, really. You'd think, it's not my role, is it, as the child or the teenager to take care of my mother. If anything, maybe my grandfather could have taken care of his daughter, but no, it was all very messed up. But what it led to was the only kind of positive regard or affirmation I got was from outsiders. So like my grandfather, who was saying, "God, you've done so well looking after your mum," and friends of the family saying, "Oh, he's really good." And of course this felt good. I wanted this praise, this affirmation. Alongside that, there was also a lot of violence going on in my childhood, and so my teenage self was kind of like merging people pleasing with protection. So I was wanting to please people and protect people. And so my child self got frozen in time through the trauma of not having had needs met. He's still then was very vulnerable, it's this child not having his needs met. Then my teenager that would please and protect, and then got into adulthood, and of course heavily influenced by those processes. No surprise I became a therapist, is it? Wanting to kind of protect and look after and please people. So in adulthood, I think the idea is that we get ourselves into a position where we can kind of manage the whole process. So now I've learned that my adult self can kind of take care of the needs of the child and settle and soothe the teenager. So now it's like my adult's in the driving seat, and my child and my teenager are still there, but they're not driving the car. No. And I think that is really what we all have to kind of aim for.
Because young child or teenager, they do still pop up sometimes, especially when we're triggered in a situation or something's difficult. But like you said, it's about that awareness then, isn't it? Hold on a minute, then bring an adult in to actually just to self-soothe, because that's what it is. What we're doing is we're our adult then is just meeting the needs of what child needs, which we didn't get as a child. Because we didn't have the caregivers or the adult around and say, listen, everything's okay, this is understandable, everything will be okay, etc. We didn't have that, so that's what we need to bring into ourselves now and let ourselves know, now, hold on, everything's going to be okay, you are good enough, everything works out okay. So we need to be adult now.
Absolutely.
So I suppose that's when they call it reparenting yourself.
Yes, exactly, But we can only reparent ourselves if we have the understanding that there's a child part of us that needs reparenting. And the examples that we're using are quite extreme, aren't they? You talked about violence, I talk about neglect, and I too have experienced physical abuse, sexual abuse. So what we're talking about is quite extreme stuff. But it could be far less extreme, and you still have a child self that didn't get its needs met. Needs for affection, attention, love, appreciation.
Just being played with.
Even a child who's being allowed to be themselves, without being conditioned by what the parents think they should be doing or who they should be. These things are traumatic for the child self. So if we don't recognise that, actually our child did experience to some extent a traumatic time, and possibly then got frozen in time, we're not going to be able to reparent it, are we? Because we don't even know it exists. So I suppose that's important, isn't it? How do we know that our child self is frozen in time and is influencing us? There's a question. I'm asking you. I'm asking myself as well. But, how do we know? Have you got any thoughts on that?
No, really. Obviously, from my own process, I've had to, obviously seek therapy and seek, internal, my own stuff and look into it. So it's only to you actually look into it and question and inquire into certain situations for me that is happening. So so just self-awareness and self-development is how I became aware of a child. And like I said, so I've become aware of all this stuff of getting the sense of being triggered by feeling powerless or anxious and fearful. A bit similar to yourself around neglecting in the sense of I was abandoned and had some abandonment, some rejection as a child. So there was a sense of not feeling good enough, for me, and not feeling heard. So I'm aware now for myself, because that's where I got the insight. So now that still creeps up at times. I don't feel good enough, or I'm not feeling heard, but I'm aware now that's child rising up. So it's just that self-awareness. I know that this is the child in me right now. But once then adult comes in, then actually, is it true? Is it true that you're not good enough?
Right.
Because you are good enough. Do you know what I mean? And you are being listened, and you have your space and time, just like they'll have their space and time. So just bring the adult in on that. So
so your adult then is almost like soothing the child, reassuring him, letting him know that he is good enough.
And some compassion.
Absolutely. Which again is often missed in childhood, isn't it? If in your childhood you don't get that kind of parental soothing, you're not going to be able to self-soothe, are you? You're not going to be able to regulate your own system when it kind of goes into some kind of trauma response.
No, as I said, I think that's what I was saying just now, is that if we didn't have the caregivers around us to actually help us emotionally regulate, because at times when we're going through this, as we said, it doesn't matter if it's more of a traumatic experience or just on a more subtle experience, it's still trauma. So if you're not being played with, not being taken out for a walk, you might feel a bit isolated, you might feel a bit lonely. But then again, obviously, if you're getting more traumatic stuff like physical or sexual abuse or anything like that, it's still going to bring up an emotional response.
I think so.
And if you're not being supported to emotionally regulate and understand that, and not just that on a cognitive level, to understand, because at those times it's confusing what's going on, and you don't know what to do. So if you haven't had that caregiver at that time to actually help you emotionally regulate, work things out on a cognitive level, it's going to be we need to adapt to that, don't we?
Yes. Absolutely.
But as you said, as we get older, adult, we need then to be the adult to come in and fulfill our needs.
Absolutely.
To be compassionate for ourselves. I think that's the main thing. How our adult can be compassionate. How we can start to meet our needs when things are difficult.
Yeah, I think that's so important, isn't it? Because if we eternally look for the outside world to meet our needs, we might be disappointed. Because I think generally the world's not that good at meeting our needs.
No,
it's a bit unreliable, isn't it, compared to how reliable we can be for ourselves.
And life's difficult for us, and, and the only person that can be there for ourselves 24 hours a day is ourselves.
It is, yeah.
So it's nice to get somebody else's, input and support, but they have their own complexities as well. So it's important that we take responsibility for bringing our adult in.
Yeah, it definitely is. I was just going to go back to the bit about how do we know if it's if our child's present, and in my work, what I do when I'm working with people is kind of look for how is their child self-presenting. So I kind of almost like work from an assumption that it will be there somewhere. I've just got to kind of notice what it is that they're saying, or how they're presenting, or what it is they're doing or talking about that reveals the child's self. And often what I'll notice is that when there's something going on for the child part of the person, there'll be vulnerability.
Yeah.
There'll be unmet needs, there'll be hurt, pain, something that we could classify as vulnerability.
Yeah.
And then I look out for the teenager. How's the teenager presenting here? And more often than not, the teenager will act in kind of like a rebellious, kind of sometimes angry, kind of preserving way, kind of anti-authority, or, kind of quite obviously angry about what's gone on to the child part.
Yeah.
So I'm watching and listening and trying to find out in the person I'm working with, how do these two parts present? And then I'll kind of just present to the person I'm working with, like, I wonder if you notice there's a child part of you here, and I think there might be a protective teenage part here, and often it makes sense to people. And once we've got that awareness, then we can start looking at how these younger parts, the child and the teen, how they're presenting and
in the moment,
influencing in the current time of adult. And usually for people, they don't know that. That's kind of like a bit of a eye-opening revelation to realise that they're actually at least three people in one.
Yeah. And that's when you can start doing the work then actually, how then they can bring their adult in, and as you say, get that awareness of them knowing, this is my child. Because I find that works sometimes, even having that self-awareness, and this is my child.
Absolutely.
Arising me right now. Okay, and then all the other stuff that I've taught her just now. Okay, that's okay. You can be with this. You can deal with this.
Absolutely. And I've got an example of how this kind of manifests in my life. A bit embarrassing, but I'll share it anyway, right? So my child, like, really vulnerable, no emotional needs met. Okay, teenagers kind of trying to protect him by saying things like, "Don't trust people." Don't get too close to people because they're only going to let you down. Better off on your own. So this is how my teenage self tries to protect me from. Kind of being in a position where I could re-experience that vulnerability, that almost like that rejection of not being cared for, not being loved and looked after. So, like in adulthood, I think I've got this far more under control these days. But not that long ago, my teenage self would have just said things like, "Just don't have any relationships with people, don't have any friendships. You can't rely on them, you can't trust them, don't bother." And this, of course, is my teenage self trying to protect my child from re-experiencing what he went through when he was a child. So okay, that's great, but of course it then means as an adult I can't enjoy friendships or go out and join in social groups and things. So I've kind of been brave and joined men's groups, but even now, like, I've been going for months, over a year to one of them, but my teenage self every time will say, "It's a long way, it's a bit dark, you've got to work tomorrow, you're tired, don't go." And honestly, the list of reasons why I shouldn't go that comes from my teenage self just goes on and on and on. And so what adult me then does is comes in and just compassionately says to him, "I know you're scared, but we're going, and it's going to be all right." And then we go, and of course, it's absolutely fine. So it's a bit embarrassing, that kind of internal self-talk that I have to go through just to get to a group or something. But how wonderful to have that awareness, though, because before I probably just wouldn't have gone. I wouldn't have even looked for a group, never mind being part of it.
I can remember some of part of my processes of, because part of myself that can appear quite stuff now is that I'm not good enough. And I can remember for quite a long time, through my teenage years, through my early adulthood, if I didn't feel a sense of good enough, I'd walk away. Just remove myself, because if I walk away, then I don't even have to look at myself if I'm good enough or I'm not good enough.
No threat.
No threat there. So it's about safety and protection. And it also goes around about education as well. Because I can remember sometimes, when I first started getting into proper education and trying to get diplomas or certificates, etc. And I can always remember, and this still can happen to me now. It's happened to me in the last couple of years, of, God, this is difficult. I don't think I'm going to be able to get child me, I don't think I'm going to get through this now. This isn't really for you.
Yeah.
All that and then it's like, no, actually, you know what's happening here.
Yeah.
This is just a part of you that doesn't feel good enough.
Yeah.
You are good enough, and then evidence it.
Yeah.
What you've done before. The last course was fine. You got through that course. You can get through this course.
Yeah.
It's just a difficulty, and you'll get through it, and you'll get through it again.
Yeah.
So it's bringing that adult in again, just to settle me and soothe me a little bit.
The adult has to be in the driving seat.
It has to be in. It has to be in the.
Has to be.
Well, if it isn't, and the child is, then I'll just walk away.
Yes. There'll be problems, won't there? If the child or the teen is in the driving seat, as in real life, you wouldn't put a 6-year-old in the driving seat of the car.
No.
Probably wouldn't put a 13-year-old in the driving seat of the car. It isn't going to go well, is it?
It wouldn't go well.
It's got to be the adult.
No.
So I think what happens is the child almost like becomes like separated, kind of frozen in time, fragmented from the rest of us, kind of protected by the teenage part of us. But it's still there. Its influence will still echo through life. So there it is. Let's just say this child, talk about myself really, aren't I? But this child didn't get its needs met. But those needs didn't go away just because you got older, did they? Those needs are still there. And then kind of echo through time all the way through to today. So, for example, if I didn't get my needs for love and affection met in childhood, my child self will still be trying to get those needs met. So I'll be looking for them to be met through collegial relationships, partnerships, romantic relationships. Is still going to be trying to get those needs met, which may or may not happen. Yeah. Because, like I said, the world's not always so reliable, is it, at meeting those needs? And then, and how fair is it really to expect my kind of, adult romantic partner to be meeting the needs of my 5-year-old self? Mm. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit kind of dysfunctional, isn't it, really? Yeah. And it's not going to go down well. No. And I think this is a big problem in relationships. If you're kind of in a relationship as a 5-year-old or a 15-year-old, but you're actually 45, it isn't going to go well, is it?
There might be a little problem.
There could be a big problem. It could be a costly divorce. But it's about getting the adult in the relationship, isn't it? Yeah. So we, to some extent, I guess we could expect our friends or our romantic partners or whatever to meet the needs of our child, and probably in a loving, functional relationship there would be an element of that. I know if I've got flu or something and my wife brings me a cup of tea in bed while I'm feeling sorry for myself, I know there's a child part of me that kind of really loves that because my mum never did that, so that my child likes that. But then, I hope I'm not kind of in denial here, but I think there's also an adult part of me that can also be in adult relationship as well. Yeah. So to some extent our adult relationships might go some way to meeting the needs of our child, but I think predominantly it's got to be like you're saying about the adult taking care of our child. Yeah,
and like I said just now, it's nice if we're talking about intimate relationship with our partners now, but it's okay. It's nice if our partner is aware of our needs and want to help support our needs, and we can embrace that and appreciate that. But at times they're not always going to be able to do that. So that's about we need to take care of ourselves, take responsibility.
Absolutely.
But I think that also goes back to what you say. How are we aware? So I think that's the fundamental. We need to be aware of our child. That can rise up in us sometimes, because if we're not aware of it and we can get carried away with it, our partner definitely isn't going to know that.
No.
Is this child in us is all it looks like is a problem.
Yeah.
And a sulk.
Exactly. I was just thinking that you storm upstairs sulking.
Yeah.
And then the partner might smack with them.
Good, and that's a good thing, because if we start getting aware of these child parts of us, and we can actually then be compassionate to that and be adult to ourselves and self-regulate ourselves, that's good on its own. But obviously if we're aware of our child, and then we can actually then express that and explain that to our partner, that's going to be more beneficial and give them some more understanding.
Absolutely.
But it's about owning it.
And that's exactly it. That's adult. To kind of know what's going on for us and to be able to explain to our partner, I'm saying partner, it could be anyone, to explain to the other person that this is what's going on for me right now. That's adult, isn't it? Because we're kind of knowing what's going on, we're taking responsibility for it, we're owning that process, and we're communicating that as an adult to the world. And then the world can respond, can't it? Somebody might say, oh God, well, really appreciate you telling me that, I get to know you a bit better. But if we're just acting from our child or our teen self, we wouldn't even think about explaining to the world what's going on. 5, 6, 7-year-old children don't necessarily think about explaining to the world what's going on for them and what they need, do they? I think it's something that adults are perhaps more able to do. I'm not saying children can't do it, but the complexity of that It needs kind of like an adult maturity to
and
to
there's
do
more
well.
to that, because and also that is going to bring and also that's helping out the teenage us as well, we say, because I relate to you as well as the teenagers, about not trust, anti-authority, not trusting, but actually then bring an adult in and having those conversations. We're talking about partners, could be a partner, could be a bot, could be anybody, you know, but actually it's starting to build trust, letting someone in, being vulnerable, which builds a deeper connection and bond with the other person as well, because the other way is just shutting down and pushing away.
Absolutely.
Which is not serving.
No, it won't do, will it?
No.
I think one of the biggest blocks I find in my work is that the teenage part, which of course can be, you know, rebellious and trying to protect from further vulnerability or harm. So I think that the teenage self can very often almost like present as a block. You know, when I'm doing therapy work, the teenage self can kind of be distrustful of me, the therapist, you know, because why would it trust me? It doesn't trust anybody. No. It's trying to keep the child vulnerable. So when I'm, you know, trying to work with the child part of the client, the teenage part can very often come in and try and, you know, almost like stand between me and their child self, because they don't want the child to be vulnerable, they don't want to be rejected, hurt, upset, whatever it is. So sometimes I have to spend some time getting to know the teenage part of the client and winning over their trust, so that they trust me and know that I'm not going to cause further harm or reject the child part or whatever it is. And that can be quite a job. Yeah,
it can be a job. But that's when, in that moments, then we can actually meet some of their needs by just letting them know, I'm here to support you. Everything's going to be okay. You know, and building some of that trust up and that relational stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. But the teenager protector part can be so incredibly clever, can't it? You know, it can, you know, just for example, get someone to just drop out of therapy. Just you don't need this anymore, you know, don't need to keep going to see them.
Well, that'd be understandable, just like I said just now, that that part of me could relate to that, because if they're not feeling good enough or they're not being heard in that situation, it's quite easy, well, I'm out of here.
Sod that, I'm off. Yeah, I mean, that definitely has happened, I think, and I think it's, I mean, I've done it myself in therapy. I remember once a therapist had kind of promised to send me a birthday greeting and then forgot. So you can imagine straight away my teenagers in to protect my child self from re-experiencing that rejection, that nobody cares type feeling. And so my teenage self just basically ended the work with that therapist. So rather than actually talk to the therapist about how that felt, what teenage me just said, well, he obviously doesn't care, don't waste your money, don't bother.
Right,
and didn't go back. So teenage me was trying to protect the little me from further hurt that he imagined this therapist was going to inflict. But actually, this was some time ago now, I think what adult me would do would be step into the driving seat and actually say to the therapist, look, you know, you said you'd do this, you didn't, that's left me feeling quite vulnerable, you know, it's left me feeling like I can't trust. But that would be adult me having a more adult relationship and conversation with that therapist, wouldn't it? Yeah.
And that's the fundamental, isn't it? It's about getting, not just starting to get aware of the child, the infant child or the teenage child, but then starting to learn how to bring adult self in and start with the compassionate. Be compassionate. Be self-regulating, etc. Which is going to be the support part.
And finding that compassion for ourselves is hard, isn't it? You know, like, I guess, you know, generally speaking, you know, everyone can kind of have compassion for a 6-month-old cute little baby sitting there gurgling away, but is it as easy to have compassion for a kind of argumentative, angry 15-year-old? It takes a bit more, doesn't it, to find compassion for somebody who's a bit more, you know, kind of argumentative and perhaps provocative or a bit difficult to live with. So it's how can we find that compassion for these parts of us that are difficult sometimes, you know, that are either in pain and hurting or can be a bit rebellious and nightmarish at times. It's hard, isn't it?
Well, I think that's when, and I know we're probably going to do you've discussed it already before, that we'll be talking about other different parts of stuff, but that's about then relearning again how we can bring these other parts in to help us be more compassionate, you know, be aware of what we're thinking, grow your emotional muscle around the triggers and the difficulties. And for myself, as you know, that you know, around heart work, about recognising is your heart open, is your heart closed, because I know my teenagers around, my heart's definitely closed, And then I know that
you've got a phrase. What's your phrase?
My phrase is and I still do this to myself now.
Yeah.
When my heart's closed, I keep my mouth closed, because
Yeah.
I know when my heart's closed, I'm probably more likely to say something I'm going to regret or I don't mean. So I definitely still say that to myself now.
Yeah, good phrase, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because if anyone's heart's closed, what's going to come out of the mouth is probably going to be
That's right,
defensive, horrible,
and
unkind.
Another thing is what I discuss with people as well is, and you've started to touch on it as well, is what's most important is how we are internally. Because however I am and however we are, and I'll talk about myself, but this is for everybody.
Yeah.
Whatever's going on internally for myself. So if my child is present, or my teenage me is still present, I'm going to be thinking very negatively.
Yeah.
I think, well, why should I do this? I'm not doing this. I can't trust them.
Yeah.
And now bugger this. I'm off with it. Now, if I try to communicate from that space internally, it's going to come out frustrated, angry.
Yeah.
That's what's going to come out. But if my internal dialogue is starts to be more compassionate to myself. Listen, you are good enough. It's okay. You can have this conversation, and this time next week, everything will probably be okay.
Yeah.
Now that's a lot more calmer, a lot more soothing. Now, if I'm like that internally, that's going to come out externally.
Absolutely.
So the bottom line is, however my internal dialogue is internally, that's how my external dialogue is going to come out. So I try and get myself in a position of being more compassionate, so I can articulate that.
That's lovely. Yeah. I like that, because when you were going through that, I kind of felt myself almost like being alienated, like with the first example, and then when you were doing the second one, it's like, oh, that's better. Yeah. Because people aren't going to respond well, are they, to kind of like an angry, bolshy, aggressive teenage energy? People aren't going to respond or be drawn to that.
And I'm sure their teenagers want to protect themselves.
Yes, yeah.
But that's how it's expensive for, because if we're talking to someone from a frustrated, angry part, it's their instinct to protect themselves.
Of course,
so they're shut down.
Yeah.
But if my heart is open and I'm being more compassionate myself, and then I talk from that space, they don't have to protect themselves.
Exactly.
That they feel they feel a safety in that and a connection with it.
Absolutely, yeah. God, that could cut down on a few Saturday night fights, couldn't it?
Well, it could have done.
I was thinking it could still do that.
Yeah.
Not that we do that, of course.
No. But in any situation, where, as I said, the stuff that we're talking about ourselves being in part, but it's anybody. It could be with our partner, our children, a boss,
anyone,
friends, strangers. It's just that how we are in that situation.
You said that a few minutes ago about emotional muscle.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that is, because sometimes if we haven't been aware of our child, and from a young age, we're talking about trauma. If we've gone through, we've talked about some serious childhood trauma to more soul stuff. Let's just take a childhood adversity.
Yeah.
And we've gone over and over and over that. We need to adapt to that, and so we disconnect emotionally, because we can't keep on going through that pain, because our caregivers, like we said already, hasn't taught us to emotionally regulate and self-soothe. So what I describe it as, we get into adulthood, our emotional muscle, I describe it as like a peanut. So as soon as we feel, I told myself, as soon as I felt powerless, anxious, could be lonely, could be rejected, don't matter what it is, what we've learned to do, we don't want to feel that.
No.
So as soon as that enters internally, boom, we bounce off to it. But unfortunately, we generally go to our mind then. But because you can't feel vulnerable in your mind, you can't feel pain in your mind. But what happens there is that we start getting distorted view of ourselves, the world, very negative.
Yeah.
But I'm sure we can branch out on that. I'll get back to the emotional stuff. So if we've learned to, every time that we feel some emotional vulnerability and we don't want to feel that, it's quite easier to come away from it.
Yeah.
Our emotional muscles like a peanut. So what we need to start doing is actually start to have a different relationship with our emotions, and start to be able to sit with that sense of powerlessness, rejection, loneliness. And the more we do that, the more we practice that, the emotional muscle will grow.
Yeah.
So, and I did this for myself.
Yeah.
So the more that I sat with feeling powerless or anxious or fearful, and breathed into it and did other techniques around it, my emotional muscle would grow.
Yeah.
And it gets bigger. So when that powerless did come in, or that sense of anxious come in, I could actually start to sit with it, start to be with it.
Yeah.
I couldn't do that when it was like a peanut.
No.
I just wanted to come
And
away
to
straight
develop
away.
capacity.
Yeah, so that's what I mean by the emotional, grow the emotional muscle, have that capacity and regulation and resilience.
And I guess in an ideal world, that's what the parent or the caregiver would do for the child. help
Yeah.
them to develop their emotional capacity.
Yeah, that's
Because
right.
if you don't get that, then you're not going to have the same kind of emotional capacity, which is why people fly off the hook, or
Yeah. That's right.
can't control their emotional
Yeah.
selves.
So if I go back to myself, that's so over time, I still got to still this is I still say this is these new tools and techniques that we use now. It's got to be daily, because if I don't use this stuff, what am I going to draw back on? Just what I've done before, because that's all I know. So even to this day now, if I feel a sense of powerlessness or anxious or whatever it is, rejection, whatever, it's just adult me coming. That's okay. You can be with this.
Yeah,
it's fine.
Yeah,
it's natural.
So your adult self really is the parent to your younger selves.
It's the parent, and just to breathe and just to be compassionate with myself, give myself some awareness, and then everything will be fine. It'll be okay.
Yeah.
You are good enough.
Exactly. Yeah. It's important to say that.
Yeah.
It is.
You are good enough. You can be with this. You can get through this, and everything's going to work out okay. That's the adult in me that comes in. These are stuff that I still say to myself now.
Yeah. It's really important, isn't it?
Yeah.
I was thinking that come back to this idea of how do we know if our child or our teenage self is presenting. I think generally if there's some kind of vulnerable type feeling, it's possible that's coming from child, isn't it? Like, I don't know, a sadness, a distress, a weakness, a vulnerability, powerlessness, that's probably going to be child. If there's something a little bit more angry or anti-authority or rebellious, probably going to be teenager. And then our adult hopefully will have the capacity to do what you're describing, to soothe those younger parts and say it's going to be all right, I've got this. Because there's a big difference, isn't there, between adult person coping with something difficult in life and the child or the teenage part dealing with that. Ideally the adult needs to deal with the challenges of life, of adult life, not the child or the teenager. And sometimes for me these feelings can kind of creep up. So a few months ago now, but I remember I was washing up and just happily washing up and just suddenly felt really anxious and thought, why am I feeling anxious? Nothing's happened, it's all okay that day. Felt this anxiety, and while I was washing up I just checked in with younger me's, and what I noticed was in my mind's eye I could see this image of this child part of me at play school. I hated play school. I just hated it. I don't know why, just hated it. And I was there, I could see little me in this play school. It's like a village hall place, and I was there in this play school, and I just compassionately adult me saying to her, what are you doing there? You don't like it. Come on. And I imagined in my mind's eye taking little me to my grandparents' house where it was lovely and it was safe and it was warm and it was, a place where as a child I was cared for. And so I just imagined little me going there. Nan was there waiting to meet him. There you go, Nan. And then straight away that anxiety just dropped away. And that took probably 60 seconds while I was washing the dishes.
Yeah.
So this doesn't have to be like a massive piece of work, does it? This could be, that was about a minute. And the anxiety had dropped away.
That's right. So we can use it in any form of difficulty or any emotional regulation, as you say. It might be stuff, as you said, and also stuff that's just happened to us right now. Just bringing that adult in.
Absolutely.
Just being compassionate, self-soothing, self-regulating, and that's our adult.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course we can do the same thing. My teenage self can get quite angry. So I've got two bits to the teenage bit. The early teenage bit was the utter people pleaser that I spoke of, and then there's an older teenage bit that's quite angry and kind of could kick off quite easily. And so I notice if I'm feeling like I can't contain it and I feel like I want to really kick off about something, then that's like that older teenage part of me. And so again, just compassionately, often I do this in my mind's eye, just imagining an image of him at whatever age, and so what's going on, you don't have to be angry, it's all right, I'm dealing with this, adult me's dealing with this.
And sometimes what I think out of me is not taking it so serious all the time. It's like because I know part of teenage me can, no, I'm just not doing it, that's it. I'm not stubborn, not doing it. But as soon as I got some awareness of that, it's just teenage me. And sometimes now I'll just share it. Okay, I'll get it. This is my still this teenage. Just have a little laugh about it. Sometimes that can diffuse it. So it's just finding other ways, whatever way you can diffuse it.
I think so.
It can be with compassion, and it can be with self-regulation, or sometimes it's that awareness. Just bring a bit of humour as well. Whatever works.
Absolutely. And it's really about, isn't it, meeting those unmet needs. Like when I was in my angry teenage times, I don't think that was authentic me. I don't think I was. Well, I mean, yes, I was angry about the situation that was going on, but I don't think it was authentically me to say I was an angry person. No. That was just a feeling I was having in response to what was happening in my life at that time. Do you know what I mean? So, because we get labelled like this, don't we? We get labelled like, oh, he's the angry one or whatever. Yeah. Actually, no, that wasn't who I was. That was just something I was feeling at the time in response to some pretty rubbish stuff.
That's really important what you're saying, because we're talking about being your authentic self, because actually when child's present, or for myself coming away from that emotional vulnerability and we're showing a frustrated, angry, sulky, wherever we go to get away from it, that's what people are seeing, and they think, oh, they're just a sulky, grumpy, stubborn, angry. Well, no, that's not who you are.
It's not the authentic self, is it?
What's going on is what's going on underneath. Is someone that's just feeling a little bit rejected or lonely or scared or anxious, and actually it's about bringing that out in and then being able to come down and actually communicate from it. Actually, you know what, right now I'm just feeling anxious. Just now I'm just feeling a little bit lonely or isolated. I just want to share that.
It's the vulnerable is probably the most authentic thing in us that's presenting in those times, isn't it? The angry teen or the people-pleasing teenage part is almost like the inauthentic, and the vulnerable is the real, the genuine, isn't it?
Because we use the word frustration a lot of the time, because I know now, like, if I get frustrated, and I'll share this with people, because all frustration is what I want to happen isn't happening. And that's what you need not to be. So when you're frustrated, that's what it is. What I want to happen is not happening.
Absolutely.
Hold on a minute, and that's, as soon as you get that awareness, you've got a choice in that moment to, right, I can either carry on with this or I can just drop down and just get a sense of what's going on right now.
Absolutely, And like, younger parts of us want it all now, don't they? There's not many children or teenagers who are happy to wait.
No, not in the modern day and age.
No, it's all over yesterday, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Definitely. I'm remembering when my stepdaughters were younger, like really young, like children. I remember that there were times when, if my wife was playing with them or whatever, I would get really jealous. And what's going on here? Really, really jealous. And of course, what I came to realise was that it was my child self that was jealous because the attention had gone to them. So my child's needs weren't being met. This attention had kind of been diverted, quite rightly, obviously, to the children. And my teenager was getting a bit angry. This isn't fair, is it? And kind of getting a bit kind of rebellious and angry about all of that. And luckily, what my adult was able to do was come in and just kind of say, okay, but actually in this situation, you're the parent to these girls. This is your wife. She's not your mum. And adult me was able to kind of present a different picture of what was going on, which really helped. So adult me talking to those younger parts calmed them, so that then I could go back into the role of being like the parent, the husband, and taking care of the child part of me that in that moment was experiencing like needs not being met. But I think that's just like, it takes a lot of self-awareness, and obviously I've done a lot of work on myself to get to that point. But I often think about that and think how difficult it can be, perhaps more so for men, in relationships when there's children that come along, and just how likely it is that kind of scenario can cause massive problems in relationships and probably ultimately end up in relationships ending. I think it's a huge problem.
And I have worked with clients as well that have brought that problem when the because
when the children come,
because when they first get into a relationship, all their needs are being met, all the attention's on them. So,
wonderful.
So it's all wonderful, but sometimes when the children come along, and the partner then is rightly so, the children need looking after, and the but it brings up something in them. And I've worked with some before that actually that's actually happened, but because they didn't feel seen or heard when they were younger, so that brought the child stuff out. Hold on, I'm over here. I'm still here. Can you not see me? So that stuff can go. But that's the awareness of that's child raising.
Absolutely.
Okay. You're still part of this. You're still loved.
Yes.
You're still included within this. And that time was helping bring adult back in with that.
I think it's essential, isn't it? Because I kind of, like, when I think about that, I kind of think about, how in another scenario, kids go to bed and then husband, ends up picking an argument with wife, about how awful it was, how, needs aren't being met, or husband goes off somewhere else trying to find somewhere where his needs can be met. And just think I mean, I'm going to say, it's quite simple. All it needs is the adult to take care of the younger parts within the self. Yeah, that's simple as a concept, but the actual reality of doing that is a bit more complex, isn't it?
Yeah.
Probably hard to do on your own. You probably would
Yeah.
need a therapist to support you to identify those parts and how they manifest.
Yeah, but we're having a conversation here about it, but yeah, it does take a bit more exploration and opening and looking into that over a longer period.
I think
to get
so,
there.
yeah. We've covered some ground, haven't we?
We have today on that, yeah.
Yeah, so
To sum up.
I think it's got to be about self-awareness, hasn't it?
Yeah.
It's having awareness that, even if you had a fairly okay childhood, there's still likely to have been things that the child experienced as traumatic.
Yeah.
So we've used extreme examples, but it's also possible that in the most loving and caring of environments, still the child would have experienced trauma and would to some extent not have had all of its needs met. Because it's pretty hard, to be honest, isn't it, for any parent to meet all the needs of the child.
Yeah. So even we can take away that for people to get more of an understand that. Take away the word trauma, so just bring in difficulty,
Struggle,
a difficulty, because nothing's perfect.
No.
No parent can be perfect.
No.
So there's going to be times that they can't, give you the attention that you need,
Exactly,
because it could have been work commitments. They might not have been very well. So there would have been a certain time, even in anybody, however good your childhood was, that times that your needs wouldn't have been met at a certain time.
Yeah.
Which would have been difficult.
It would have been difficult.
Difficult.
I often think of the example of a child who's just been very beautifully drawing a picture or something while mum cooks tea, takes the picture to mum, and mum's just like, oh, not now, I'm just cooking, and then that child is like, oh, the devastation, this lovely picture didn't get the full recognition that they'd hoped for and probably needed. So I just wanted to really kind of put across that this isn't all about the most extreme of traumas. Everybody's going to have experienced some adversity or difficulty or struggle, aren't they?
No matter what extreme, from a lower extreme to a higher
Exactly.
extreme.
And those unmet needs that everybody, I think, will have from childhood will echo through life and will reappear in relationships with anybody going forward.
Yeah, so it's what you say as well. So it's gaining that awareness when it comes in. Yeah. Because else you would just keep on repeating the pattern every time.
Absolutely. It happens. My mantra, awareness equals choice equals change.
That's right.
If we're aware of something, we could decide that we're going to make a different choice.
That's right.
And then that might lead to change.
Which is a brilliant mantra, because as soon as you got that choice, as soon as you got that awareness, you got that choice, you think, right, well, I can continue down this path, or actually I can do something differently now.
Yeah. But without the awareness, there's no choice.
Without the awareness, no.
You just almost like operate on default. You just keep doing the same thing time after time after time, don't you? Yeah. So the awareness is crucial, I think, in terms of choosing to do something differently.
So I think then we come to the antidote to that is bringing our adult in.
Absolutely, compassionate adult.
Compassionate adult around it.
Because I have seen and heard many times where someone will speak quite critically of their child or teenage self, like they just need to get a grip, or they just need to clear off, or these quite brutal responses. But it has to be compassion, doesn't it? It has to be love.
Yeah, it has to be love. It's like, I know we're summing up now, but just going back, because I can remember one of my things I would say, like, well, I just don't care. I don't care. Actually then it's like, hold on, is it 100% true you don't care? No, I do care.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was enough for me to then start settling it down, opening my heart back up to be compassionate about myself. But then, because as soon as I'm compassionate myself, internally, like I said just now, then externally I can be more supportive and understanding, compassionate, externally to those around me too.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it will, won't it? It'll ripple out.
Yeah.
I think there's a difference, isn't there? Like you seem to talk to your younger self like in like a dialogue, whereas I think what I do is kind of visualise it. Right, so it's just both okay, aren't they? They both work. It's just works. Like I tend to visualise it more. I think kind of visualise like the younger me and imagine a conversation like using visualisation, which sounds like you just kind of have like an internal self-talk.
Is that? I've had visualisations before and talk to my young me as a visualisation. You are okay, you are livable, and etc. But now you're just generally in today's terms. I have that.
So you do it that way now.
I have that internal dialogue now, but I have had the visualisations before, so I understand that. Yeah.
I mean, for anyone listening to this and perhaps wants to get into this work, I mean, it's a pretty emotional thing to do. But there's the exercise where you get a photo of your child or your teenage self, and really try and build a compassionate dialogue with that person in the photo. But it's quite emotive, isn't it?
It is quite emotive.
It's quite challenging.
And like I know you said about the photograph, but there's other ways to do it. Sometimes you can go into more of a visualization, just remembering what was you wearing, what room was you in, do you know where, what can you remember any smells, etc. Really just get a a real visualization and the sensory stuff of how it was to you, and and then bring adult you in and what would you like to say?
Absolutely. And then I think there's something about, this is a long summing up, isn't it? There's something about pausing, isn't there? And just checking out, where's this response coming from? Is it coming from my child? Is it from my teen? And if it is, or it could be, let me see if adult me has a different response. And just that pause, I think, could just change people's lives. In terms of interactions with others, different relationships, ways of responding to the world. I think, I don't use that phrase lightly, because it's been my work for many years, helping people to get an understanding of these internal processes and get adult in the driving seat. And it does change their lives. It does change their world. So it's huge, isn't it?
So now it's about let your adult take care of your child.
I think that's it.
I think that is it.
I think that's a good place to end.
That's good.
Okay. So if you enjoyed this episode, do remember to do the like, share, follow, whatever the option is on the platform that you're watching or listening to this on, and we will see you next time in the next episode. We appreciate you taking the time to listen to us today. If anything you have heard has resonated with you, you would like to explore more, or have found difficult, you can get in touch with us. Our details are in the show notes below, along with some other useful links.